But maybe we should talk about COVID-19 and how it's affecting, countries around the world. So maybe let's start. Why don't we start with Kazakhstan, because that's something we talked about over the last couple of weeks. Any new news there?
Yeah, so the public information obviously is that Kazakhstan's cases have reduced, but they're still significant. So they're at about 250, a bit below 250 new cases a day. And if we put that in a little bit of context, when Kazatomprom announced that they would be suspending wellhead development for at least for an estimated 3 months, their cases were averaging 50 per day. So still 5 times up from when they decided it was appropriate to take that action. And it is worth thinking about Kazakhstan, because I think a lot of the market is looking at that 3-month estimate, wondering if they would potentially come on early, which they'll have to do in the next couple of weeks, or if it can go longer. And we've talked at least a couple of times about why that production disruption extending would have such a compounding effect on both sentiment as well as the pounds available in this market. So we've got still quite a few cases coming through. They're not out of the woods yet. Karaganda province, which borders the most important production centre of uranium in Kazakhstan, there was a New York Times article that talked about a number of towns being shut down or shut in, various restrictions because of outbreaks there. Someone who works in the mining sector in Kazakhstan that I deal with, not in uranium, but in another commodity, they told me a story during the week about how there was a case in their office building, and so they've all had to go home for another 2 weeks, and how disruptive that is. So there is that sort of disruption going on. And so we've had the guidance that the 3-month is likely to take its full course. And what'll be really interesting is at the end of this month to have a look and see what guidance Kazatomprom gives going forward. And, when you talk about those sort of numbers that we have, I think it's very open to them to play it safe, be a bit cautious and stay offline.
And let's just remind people what the implications of that are, which is, we talked about this last week. Mr. Primatov talked about the possibility, or at least they would consider, coming and buying in the open market. Not something that they had envisaged a couple of months ago, certainly not discussed a couple of months ago. So the implications in terms of availability in the open market are potentially quite big.
Particularly if they don't have a firm idea of when they're going to come on again and how long it could go. Because if these decisions are truly being made on medical grounds, nobody knows. Nobody knows. And, the scare that you referred to about second waves in the US, well, Kazakhstan starts hitting winter as early as October on the steppes there. And they could well be looking at, well, what would the implications of a second wave be? Would they do a couple of months of wellhead development with the risk that they'd have to shut in again and delay and see winter out? So there is a lot of uncertainties there. And just because of the sheer volume of their production in the market, and the fact that the 4th month of a production disruption will have a much bigger impact than the first 3 months because of the ISR mining, this could really have quite a big effect once they start coming into the spot market.
Okay, so implication for uranium investors, or people thinking of investing in uranium, is that the macro story just builds and builds. It's accelerating. If Kazatomprom has to come into the market, there's going to be less supply around. So therefore, when this thing pops, it should pop quite quickly.
Correct. And what has slowed the uranium recovery down for the last 3 years? In other words, we had fundamentals that 2.5, 3 years ago were very, but the market hasn't reacted to it. And it's been the presence of inventory primarily that has done that. It has enabled utilities to defer buying decisions and various other mechanisms within the market that's disconnected the price from some very, very strong fundamentals. Once that inventory goes, and particularly if it starts going backwards because you've got large spread producer buying of uranium in the spot market, plus a nice little sentiment lift coming from either financial investors or utilities realising they need to restock, then you've got the ideal conditions for the fundamentals to match up to price. And price has got a long way to go before it matches fundamentals.
It certainly does. I mean, again, discussed on many of our previous weekly catch-ups. Okay, well, let's kind of move it on, because I think what we're trying to understand is, what's happening in the world of uranium in terms of production. So let's go for your home from home, Namibia. What's the news from there?
Well, Namibia has locked down the Orongo province, or Orongo region again. Orongo is the region in Namibia that's host to all of the uranium mining. Bannerman's Tango project, Deep Yellow, Paladin's Langer Heinrich project, and of course the giant Rossing and Husab projects that are owned by two of the Chinese utilities. So they're in lockdown. They're in lockdown for 14 days at this stage. But importantly, during the first lockdowns, Namibia ironed out all of the details around mining and what's allowed. And as a result of that, mining has been classified as an essential service. So mining carries on. If we go right back to our first discussions about COVID-19, you can still operate a full workforce and you can still operate a mine, but you can't do it perfectly easily when the rest of the society around you is shut down. So it'll just make it hard for them to hit targets and do so on for the next couple of weeks, but essentially full production.
Okay, so when do we start understanding or hearing about the numbers in terms of, will it be 5%, will it be 10% reduction in their, operating output?
We'll get that through Bank of Namibia figures that'll only come through at the end of the year.
Okay.
We're talking about utility-owned mines here that have got no direct disclosure obligations in that way. They obviously need to keep the IAEA informed and the Namibian government informed. But there's not an awful lot of transparency there. And for that matter, not all of that uranium's hitting the market in any case. A lot of it goes directly back to those utility owners for absorption into their own supply chain.